And hello good people of the internet, it is I, Tommy Kelly, and this is Adventures in Woo Woo. And in this episode I want to talk to you about Hypersigils. So welcome to pandemic Europe, where we have the coronavirus coming attacking us from all angles. We also have a very windy day here in Ireland, and I'm nearly sure we had a bit of thunder, but it's hard to know because I live in I work in a metal box essentially, and everything, strong wind can sound a bit like thunder. So if you hear some rumbles in the background, my apologies, and there's some good timing. I'm not sure how well that'll translate onto the microphone. Hopefully not too bad. So, over the last while, I've been talking a bit on the podcast and on these videos and on various social medias that I'm going to be doing another comic, or I am doing another comic. I have an awful lot of the work done on it in the sense of the prep work, the pre-production. So I have characters, I have the story for the most part worked out. I have the kind of art style in my head, what I want to do, and all of that kind of prep work going. But there's an element to it which I think some people will find interesting, more the kind of magic people than the art people. But there's such a crossover between art and magic that I assume I'm just talking to most of the same people. So it's strange that when you kind of see a separation, you know, I'm doing an art video or a magic video or something like that, and that maybe is an unneeded kind of delineation. In that, as Alan Moore says, art is magic and magic is art. And I've recently reread or re-listened to the KLF book that John Higgs wrote, and it's definitely that whole thing of art is magic and magic is art is the whole kind of essence or backbone of that book, which is a wonderful book, and you should all read it if you've any kind of interest in magic and art. Not necessarily just KLF, because it's this kind of, they're irrelevant to it in many ways, even though it's a biography about them. But anyway, the bit that I want to talk about the new comic is the idea of a hypersigil. Now, hypersigils, as far as I know, that term is created by Grant Morrison, and maybe not, but it's definitely synonymous with him, and he's the guy who kind of promoted it. And when people think of hypersigils, they think of Grant Morrison, and in particular they think of the comic The Invisibles. And what it means, or what his approach to it was, essentially doing a piece of art in order to effect change in his own life. So you'd write a piece of fiction with certain characters that represent you or different people in order to put them into situations that you will hope will echo into your own life. Now, from a non-magical perspective, that sounds a bit ludicrous, but from an actual magic perspective, that's sound magic, that's great magic. And the thing is, it bloody works, and there's no question of it. You ask anyone, any writer who's magically inclined or not, and they will start talking about the characters having a life of their own and doing their own kind of things. So we already have, even in the most kind of material, mundane kind of sense of these things, a sense of fiction having its own volition or its own kind of, I don't know, sentience in some kind of way. And I'm always hesitant when I talk about these type of things, particularly when I talk around things like servitors or 40 servants like that, in the sense of that it's not as if, and this is the fear people have, that they're going to somehow become too sentient and take over your life and destroy your life. Because people worry about this because they hear about these stories about tulpas, which are thought forms, that wreck people's lives in a kind of poltergeist type way, or if you leave them around too long, they go bad or they go off, and there's all of these type of things, which I've talked about in a couple of places before, but so I won't labour the point here. But there definitely seems to be that a fiction, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a fiction, because we can widen hypersigil, but for the minute we just talk in terms of fiction, can have its own kind of autonomy in a way that it probably shouldn't. Given, you know, if you look at the world from a kind of materialist reduction, no woo kind of way, and you can see that when you say things like a hypersigil, when I can have a character in my comic or my book go through an experience that I want to go through in the hope that I get the experience, you can kind of say, well, I can understand this kind of sympathetic magic of it. Sympathetic magic is when you use one thing to represent something else. So like the typical example of a voodoo doll, which is like, it's a bad example because what we think of as voodoo doll is very Hollywood and not really voodoo at all. But that idea of sticking a pins into a cushion that represents a person, and they will feel the pain. So it's an equivalency, so it's sympathetic magic. So the hypersigil as sympathetic magic, doing something to one area of the world in order to affect another part of the world. And I found this to be very true even in a non-kind of hypersigil way. In a video I've talked about before, which will I put in the show description, where there's something that you're avoiding or not doing or needs sorting in one area of your life seems to have knock-on effects and block other parts of your life. So I think this kind of thing is, it's all related anyway. There's like, the magic is all kind of idea space, Alan Moore's idea space, where he talks about that we are surrounded, or I suppose like it's like an astral plane of ideas, and that's where ideas arrive from, say. But he has also this kind of interesting thing that things can be joined and connected in idea space that aren't connected in the material world. So say airports are a good one because they're connected in our heads, but they're not connected in any kind of locations. And you know, we can have different kind of connections through things like, say, films and TV shows have different connections because of the actors, but they're not connected by genre, by location where they're shot, by even by years or any of these things. So we can have all these kind of connections that are real and, you know, not imaginary, like in the sense they're a real kind of connection, but don't actually involve connections in the real world. So when you look at things like hypersigils and you try and see the connection between a piece of fiction and the real world, I think it's working on that kind of idea space, that astral plane, that kind of thing, if we were to buy into the idea. And I do buy into the idea because I once did a hypersigil and it was unbelievably successful. The problem with that hypersigil was that I didn't realise, it seemed that it was unsuccessful for a long while because I didn't realise that it hadn't finished its journey or its magic, or the ritual wasn't over. And that was a comic I did called THEM, and it was designed as a hypersigil, like from day one, that I knew there was a particular ending that I wanted, which was to create a great piece of art, and that I was going to have to put the character through a certain kind of torment in the hope that he would have his end result, that he would become a greater person and therefore worthy of the end result. I have a whole series on the blog that explains all of it in depth. If you want to read it, the link will be in the show description. And I also made sure in the hypersigil that the victory was assured, because it opens with the victory and then goes back in time to how it got there. So there's no question of, even if the characters did start gaining their own autonomy and the story wanted to go in a particular way, I had the safety net of the ending was already assured. Now, in a sense, while the journey wasn't assured and the ending was, there's still, the book or the comic itself goes past the ending into its own kind of, its own thing that I hadn't foreseen in a good positive way. So I suppose even with the kind of notion of putting in, your victory, if you want, there's still a chance that, it's, as we know with magic, that it can still have its own little wily ways and get around you. I was lucky in this kind of thing. But what happened was that for a long while it seemed like it didn't work, because it didn't work out. There was no big magic, or there was no big success, or there was no great piece of art. It wasn't until I looked back after doing the 40 Servants and the kind of magnificent success and out of the blue that was, and how that had echoed precisely the beats of the hypersigil in the comic THEM. It's undeniable to me, and I will not be convinced otherwise, to be that's just it. It's too on the nose, it's too exact, and it's too perfect for it not to have been the case. Now, all of these things might be predetermined, and I've talked about that before, as if I've talked about most things, I suppose, at this point, where if it is predetermined, is the hypersigil nearly nothing more than a kind of a view of the future, and so you're not really changing the thing, you're just looking at the future from a past point of view, which is an interesting thing to think of. That's if we believe in predeterminism, which I'm not sure I do. But I'm not sure I do because I don't like the idea, rather than I think it's not the right thing that's going on. So in a hypersigil, come back to Grant Morrison, he talks about it in the sense of that he he had put himself in as the main character, and he looks kind of like the main character, or at least after King Mob, which is his character in The Invisibles, Grant Morrison himself started looking like King Mob, so it's hard to know. Alan Moore also had a couple of interesting things where comics overlapped into his life, where he met John Constantine, which incidentally, it is pronounced Constantine, not Constantine, so the comics tell us, and Ian Vincent is always making sure that people know. he met him in real life. One in an actual magical ritual, a proper thing, where he said that the secret to magic is that any cunt could do it. Pardon my French. Not, you know, there's a kind of a further implication and conversation I could have around that. Not every cunt can do it, but you could do it. That is the kind of the sense of it. But that was very real for him, and he thinks, Alan Moore thinks that that's an actual thing, you know, that happened, a crossover, in as much as Alan Moore is sure about any of these things, I suppose. He also seen him one day in a cafeteria or restaurant of some kind of description, where he walked past, gave him a smile, and then walked in, round the corner, and disappeared, kind of thing. So I find that interesting, in that things seem to cross over from fiction. So anyway, the long and short of it is that I am putting a Hypersigil into the next comic. And it's by far the most grandiose magic I will do, and it's going to be a long term, because the comic, in the sense of what I want to do it, all going to plan, will be a long term comic. It's a long story, and it's very decompressed and happening over not a long period of time, but it's not over 1,000 years or anything like that, but it's like closer to not real time either. Anyway, you'll know when we get there. But think of it more like a manga kind of thing, in the sense of the episodic way that they do it, that their comics are really long, like something like Goodnight Pun Pun, which is like 7 volumes long in the omnibus thing, so it's like 3,000, 4,000 pages set over 6 years, all of this type of thing. So it's that more than Dark Knight Returns Year 1 or something like that. Think Cerebus, if you want to think kind of Western comics, you know, where you have the 300 issues, the 30 years to do it, all this kind of thing. I'm not thinking 30 years I'll have, you know. So anyway, it's, while now at the minute I am in a very rational, non-magic place for the most part, because I'm going through an awful lot with the therapy and shadow work and trying to sort my brain out. I have to be in a rational place. I kind of can't allow too much magical thinking, in the sense of I'm trying to approach this from a logical point of view. So it's very much a paradigm shift, and I'm aware I'm doing it. But what has happened is that I've essentially disenchanted my world a bit. So part of the hypersigilness of going into this comic is the re-enchantment of the world, which I think is a lovely, wonderful way of looking at things. Oh, that's what magic is, which I think comes from Gordon White. He certainly says it an awful lot, but I'm not sure if it originates with him. But there's an awful lot more going on, and it's an awful lot more kind of making a stamp on my world and making a mark, and kind of counting myself in and demanding, in a sense, rather than pleading for certain revelations or things to happen. Whereas there is a kind of thing in magic, and I definitely assume I'm getting it from many things, from culture, from upbringing, but from like the Catholic background I have, which is all about kind of looking, you know, to saints to interject with you to God, you know. But like it's kind of up to them whether to do it or not, because you're kind of pleading with them, and please, you know, please God, if it's for my highest good, well, you know, allow this, or, you know, like totally just giving your power away. Now, it works for a lot of people, and it has worked for me in many cases too, so don't dismiss the idea. But I think this whole idea of authority in magic is something that I'm definitely putting my stamp on. And Robbie talked about it in one of the Magic People podcasts, where he's saying that his kind of thing is that, you know, the magic involves, like, there's some posturing is going to be needed at some point. And this is my posturing kind of movement, where I'm going from one stage of my evolution as a wizard into the next stage in a very in a very direct and a very concrete and deliberate manner, with forcing my kind of my will on the world, and in a sense going to include all of you all who read it, whether you want to or not. That is my agenda, and I'll be upfront with it very early on, what the participation level is. So Hypersigils, how would you do them in your own thing? Well, I mean, we don't have to limit them to comics, even though that is kind of the origin of it, I assume, going by my kind of understanding of it all. Gordon White, who I've spoke about a number of times in this video, I mean, like, we all know who he is, of Rune Soup, would consider his Rune Soup his Hypersigil. So that's a blog that turned into a podcast, that has videos, that has courses, that has premium members, and it looks like a product in many ways, as does a comic and as does a book. And he, you know, that's his Hypersigil. That's things he's doing in a sense, to affect his own life. And obviously, absolutely has. He's gone from advertising, you know, as a kind of 9-to-5 job, to a farm, and you know, being a teacher online, you know, all through RuneScape, this kind of hypersigil that went along that kind of way. You can have it as a painting, you could have it as a dance, you could have it as anything you want. And you see, it's at this point that the kind of definition of hypersigil kind of loses a bit of its thing, because when is it a hypersigil and when is it sympathetic magic? When is it just a sigil? When is it just intent? When is it just, you know, an art piece that, you know, you're trying to affect change in the world in a kind of direct way by art, by being, you know, by like it kind of be shocking, I suppose, you know, doing something quite shocking in the hope that this kind of shock of this art and this provocativeness is going to change the world. And like that in itself is magic too, but mightn't be seen as magic and mightn't be seen in a kind of magical sense by the artist. So there's a lot going on. So the only thing I think that would make it a hypersigil is that, for me, and this is me alone, is that it would have to, in a sense, include some sort of creativity. There has to be a sympathetic thing to it, meaning that one thing has to represent another thing, and there has to be deliberate intention of this is what you were trying to do, that it's more than just writing the story, it's that you're making it a hypersigil too. But we can then go into things like advanced magic for beginners, where Alan Chapman talks about, you know, like, you know, do something, decide it means this, do the thing, and then, you know, result, in the sense of that you could make a magical hypersigil out of eating a hamburger if you want. And I think, you know, I don't see anything wrong with that. This idea of sympathetic magic is something that we have, you know, always around us, particularly, you know, in the magic thought, but even in just kind of human thought. So anyway, I would suggest that you have as little amount of rules around these things as you possibly can, and just go with, once you have the intention of what you're doing. And of course, if you do something and nothing happens, maybe, like me, wait a bit longer, see if it works out. But also, as with all magic, try it, see if it works. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't, augment it, change it, or drop it. And then, you know, until you find a way that works for you, because it's chaos magic, it's subjective, it's what works for you. And that's my definite opinion on the whole magic thing, is that it's about the operator themselves, it's the wizard, and all that flows from that. So that's kind of my thoughts around hypersigils, where they kind of came from, which is Grant Morrison. If you want to know a bit more about that, check out The Invisibles, check out his Disinfo lecture, check out Talking with Gods, which is a documentary about him. There's a great podcast, I'll put all these links in the show description, about him recently talking about magic, which is wonderful. Check out that KLF book. And myself and Spud will be talking about that on an upcoming podcast, so you can perhaps save that for another rainy day. And yeah, and then your own kind of hypersigils, just do them. And if it seems like sympathetic magic is something that you're interested in, then it's a really great way of getting into it, because it also, you know, it has your creativity behind it. It gets you doing art, it gets you making things, it gets you out there, and it gives you a bit of a sense of control over both your art, over your life, and over creation in its totality. So, good people of the internet, until our next adventure, be well.